Everybody, it really is very exciting, I think, for all of us to be able to gather here this morning. And as Tara's just explained to you, I'm going to be basically talking about synodality, Diocesan Pastoral Council, all of those kinds of things. It's really meant to be described as a keynote address. I'd prefer to think of it as a kind of an introduction to all of the good things that are going to be part of our time here today. I want to begin by just saying how grateful I am, obviously, to everybody who's worked so hard to bring this event together. I won't belabour that, but I'm sure you've already picked up just how much work has gone into it. I particularly want to comment on, and I'm sure it's in everyone's minds, but I particularly want to comment on the way we started this morning. And the way we started this morning, not just with a quick in the name of the Father, the Son and the Holy Spirit and a rushed Our Father and Hail Mary and then on to the real business of the day, we started with a significant time devoted to the Lord, to us together in the presence of the Lord, to prayer. This is already an indication of the way the church is moving and what synodality is inviting us into. You'll hear a lot today and over the progress of what is beginning today about discernment. Discernment comes out of the kind of experience we shared together this morning, our readiness to stop, to slow down, to reflect, to listen, to let go so as to make room for new things to happen inside of us. So I really want to make that point because for many of us now, it's the way we always start these kinds of things, but for many others, perhaps not yet. I think we've already had a wonderful experience of what synodality is inviting us into. As Tara explained, and as you can see on the screen, what I want to do is to situate the few remarks I want to share with you this morning in the context of the Plenary Council. And it might be useful for you to know that the last time I was in Rome, I spoke to the new prefect of the dicastery for bishops. They're responsible for overseeing the reception of what we did at the Plenary Council. He raised the question with me before I had a chance to raise it with him, and he assured me that they had received everything from us. What they do is that they kind of break it apart and distribute different parts of the work of the council to the various different, we might call them departments in Rome. And at that stage, which was just after Easter, they were still waiting to receive the comments back from the various parts of the church's organisation over there. So things are happening, things are moving. It's not just sitting there on a shelf somewhere in Rome. I can't tell you how long it will take before we get a final response from Rome. But when I am in Rome, which I will be shortly, I will raise the matter again. Having said that, you would all be aware that most of the things that emerge from our Plenary Council are things that we can already begin to do. They're things that we can already begin to think about and pray about and talk to each other about and make some decisions about. And one of them is this question of the possibility of a Diocesan Pastoral Council. I'll talk about that a little bit more in a moment, but really the whole day is focused on that, so I don't need to say too much about that except to set some general ideas around it. But I did want to just recall for us very quickly where we've come from in relationship to this matter, because a journey was begun a long time ago here in the Archdiocese, which is now beginning to be crystallised, and there's a new energy about taking it forward. Really, it goes back to the year 2012, not because that was the year I became the Archbishop, but because that was the year when we had the year of grace. Some of you who were around at that time might remember the year of grace. And I'll just say a very brief word about why the bishops of Australia decided to call that year of grace. It was because the bishops, and I had been a bishop then for 4 or 5 years, the bishops were deeply aware that the church in Australia needed a new sense of direction, a new sense of energy, a new focus. And because we had so many issues and so many challenges and so many problems, really, let's be honest, that we as a church have to face. But what became very obvious to the bishops was that we were not yet at a mature stage of our Christian discipleship, had not reached a level of maturity that really equipped us to deal really well with all of the challenges and issues we faced. And so the bishops basically invited everyone in the church in Australia to go on retreat, to make a year's retreat. And the heart of that retreat was to return our focus to Christ and discover again what it means to be a disciple of Jesus. We are nothing if we aren't disciples of Jesus. If that's not the thing that holds us together, then we have no purpose to exist. We follow him. He is our way. And that's what we need to rediscover. It's what some of you will remember, what I said as my hope for the diocese when I became the Archbishop, that as a community of disciples, we would return the church in Perth to Christ and return Christ to the very heart of the church so that everything else is seen through the lens of our following of Jesus. And I'm hoping that what we're doing here today and what will unfold from today will always have that as a central focus, that we never forget that. Because without that, we tend to get lost in all sorts of things. We get focused on individual issues and forget what the ground and the foundation of those issues is meant to be all about. So I really wanted to say that. That then led to the Archdiocesan plan that unfolded. Then it led to the decision of the bishops to have the Plenary Council, and luckily, fortuitously, providentially, guided by the Spirit, our gathering today is just 1 week before the opening of the Synod of Bishops on synodality. And those of you who were part of the Plenary Council and have been following the journey of the preparations for the Synod will know that the Synod, that is, at the level of the universal church, very significant aspects of our Plenary Council have been borrowed and are incorporated into that process. So what we are doing here and what we've been doing in the church, not just here in the Archdiocese or in WA, but right across the country, is deeply in sync with what the universal church is doing. And in many ways, the universal church has learnt something from us. We have a lot to offer the universal church. Okay. All by way of introduction, and I'm sure Tara will tell me when my time's up, so I might not get too far into this, but I'll do my best. You've got up on the a reference to Decree number 7. Comes out of, this is the Plenary Council. It comes out of that area of the Plenary Council which focused on the theme of at the service of communion, participation and mission. Now on the next slide, which I hope someone will bring up for us. Or am I supposed to? There we are. Very efficient. It's just a quote. It's a bit long, but it's a quote from what I would call the theological foundation or the preamble to Decree number 7 of the Plenary Council. It's really picking up a lot of the things that were part of our reflection this morning during our prayer. In baptism, the Holy Spirit gives believers, and therefore the whole church, no one's excluded, a special gift so that together they can faithfully interpret and live the Christian gospel in the diverse circumstances of history and culture, and in church speak, that's called the sensus fidelium, that instinctive sense of what is at the heart of our faith that the Holy Spirit shares with all of us. It then goes on to add, the Spirit enables ongoing discernment of the signs of the times in the light of the gospel. The signs of the times, the realities in which we find ourselves, which we face day after day in the life of the church and in the life of our society, but always in the light of the gospel, always in the light of our following of Jesus. And then a favourite phrase of mine, all the baptised participate in the 3 offices of Christ, the 3 characteristic features of the life and ministry of Jesus, if you like, as a priestly, prophetic and royal people. That's the theological foundation. On the next slide, I've just lifted little bits out of this, by the way, but it's all on the website of the Plenary Council if you want to follow it through. On the next slide is then an affirmation. So in the light of all of that, therefore, the Plenary Council, and it's important to remember that a Plenary Council is one of, or is in fact the highest level of the church gathering as the church that is possible at the local level. And when I say local, I mean the church in Australia. It's very authoritative. So, therefore, the Plenary Council affirms that governance in the Catholic Church, the exercise of leadership, governance in the Catholic Church should be exercised in a synodal manner, with the appropriate participation of all the baptised. So we don't get to just hand it over to the Archbishop or to an elite group of leaders to make all the decisions and then we just do what they tell us to do. It's a shared exercise. This is discernment. This is something that has always been in theory at the heart of the life of the church. We don't always experience it in practice. Governance in the Catholic Church should be exercised in a synodal manner with the appropriate participation of all the baptised. Again, no one should be excluded. Then it goes on to a very practical thing. For a diocese or an eparchy, that's a diocese of the Eastern Catholic Churches, this would mainly involve the participation of the Diocesan Pastoral Council. Well, it can't involve that here in Perth because we don't have one yet. Used to, we don't now, but that's why we're gathering today, to start that journey. Then the Council of Priests, which is a body of priests, some elected by their brother priests, some appointed by the bishop to provide advice to him. The College of Consultors, which is a smaller group, which the bishop can also seek advice from. The Diocesan Finance Council, the Diocesan Curia, that's the leadership group within the sort of central governance of the diocese, various boards and governance bodies, and at times a diocesan synod. The two things that I think we should focus on today are a Diocesan Pastoral Council and a diocesan synod. Now, what those might mean will all unfold throughout this day and in time to come. But they're the two things that I think are really important. And of course, for a parish, this would mainly involve the participation of the Parish Pastoral Council, kind of a localised version of the Diocesan Pastoral Council, and the Parish Finance Committee. So there was a theological foundation, then there's this affirmation, and on the next slide, there's an invitation. In fact, it's slightly more than an invitation. Therefore, here again, remembering the Plenary Council is an authoritative body, presuming that this will be accepted by Rome, this becomes the local law of the Church in Australia. Therefore, this Plenary Council calls for all dioceses and eparchies to establish a Diocesan Pastoral Council. And then it goes on to talk about some resources that are already available to help us work our way through all of that. The important thing that I would want to say here is, and I'll say a little bit more about it shortly, but yes, there are guidelines, there are church traditions and laws and all the rest of it around diocesan pastoral councils. They're meant to operate at the universal level. So those things are principles which apply right across the world. But we have to have a diocesan pastoral council that is then, if you'll forgive me for using a rather churchy word, but is then incarnated in the reality of our local situation. It has to work for us. It has to help us make our discipleship truer and deeper and richer and more effective. And that's the challenge. How to take something that is being recommended right across the world. It's already a strong recommendation in canon law, but because it's not yet obligatory, lots of places don't have it. So it's already recommended at the universal level. We want to establish it here, but we have to create one which is faithful to everything that we're asked to be as part of the Catholic Church, but also realistic and adapted to our reality. And I think that's part of the challenge that we've gathered this group of people together to think about. So on the next slide, I've kind of summed that up. the fundamental question, which I think we together are being invited to decide, yes, but I'd prefer to use the word discern, because decide might be, well, we'll take a vote and see what the majority want. Discern is we'll enter into a process to try and listen to the Holy Spirit and where the Holy Spirit is leading us. The one doesn't exclude the other, but in a Christian community, you don't get to the deciding part, or you shouldn't, until you've done the discerning part. So, what kind of Diocesan Pastoral Council do we want here in the Archdiocese of Perth? Do we need here in the Archdiocese of Perth? We will have to look at what canon law says, and later on this morning that will be opened up for us. We do need to pay attention to the Plenary Council, and I'll talk about that in a moment. We will, of course, need to pay very close attention to what's about to unfold in the Synod. It starts today week, goes for a month. But then, of course, just as our Plenary Council had 2 sessions, so the Synod has 2 sessions, and the bishops will gather again in October next year for the final session. So we'll have to be paying close attention to what happens there and the concrete realities of the Archdiocese of Perth. So if I had to sum up the way I understand the question, how can we as the Catholic community of the Archdiocese of Perth be more faithfully and more fully all that the Lord is asking us to be? The Plenary Council offered us a lot of help in delving into these questions, and I just want to remind you, you won't be able to keep it in your minds, but hopefully these slides might be made available to you all on another occasion. I want to remind you of 6 things that came out of the Plenary Council. These were the 6 topics that had emerged from that consultation that went across the whole church in Australia, and everything was gathered together, and out of that very significant consultation, these were the themes that that emerged. 2 things. First of all, how is God calling us? So this is a call from God. It's not just us trying to work it all out on our own. It's an invitation from God to be a Christ-centred church. Goes back to what I said at the start. If we're not a Christ-centred church, we're certainly not the inheritors and the continuers of what Jesus started 2,000 years ago. So, how is God calling us to be a Christ-centred church in Australia? And we would say, here in Perth, that is missionary and evangelising. And these are key words we might keep in mind as part of the discernment process moving forward. How is God calling us to be a Christ-centred church in Australia? That is inclusive, participatory and synodal. How is God calling us to be a Christ-centred church which is prayerful and Eucharistic? A Christ-centred church which is humble, healing and merciful. A Christ-centred church which is a joyful, hope-filled servant community. And a Christ-centred church which is open to conversion, renewal and reform. This is what emerged from the Plenary Council consultations. It mirrors almost exactly what emerged from the worldwide consultation in preparation for the Synod. So something is happening. The Spirit is doing something in the church at the moment, and while the Spirit can be rather challenging at times, we should also be very excited, I think, by the fact that it seems to be that at this particular moment in the life of the church universally and also for us here in Australia, the Spirit is starting to move in a very significant way. So, on to the next slide. And you'll see the links, I think, between what was on that previous slide and this one. These are the 3 themes for the Synod. Communion. How can we be more fully a sign and instrument of union with God and of the unity of all humanity? Mission. How can we better share gifts and tasks in the service of the gospel? The subtext being not leaving it just to a few. How can we better share the tasks with everybody? And then participation. What processes and structures and institutions are needed in a missionary synodal church? These are the questions that the Synod will begin to explore in the coming weeks. So, believe it or not, only 2 slides to go. Next slide is me. This is me trying to put it together in my own head so that I understand how I'm kind of imagining all of this, but so I offer it to you. This is the question, or the 2 questions I ask myself. How can we, as the Catholic community of the Archdiocese of Perth, strengthen and deepen our identity as, first of all, a community? This is so important, and it's so difficult to develop and maintain. When the pressures are to split apart, we have to keep working at maintaining and deepening communion. And so I've used that phrase again that I referred to earlier. That is a chosen race, chosen by God, a royal priesthood in which we all share in one way or another with this notion of Christ as the priest. What that means is a topic for another day, but it's a very important one. A consecrated, that means a holy nation. We are God's own people. To develop that sense of our dignity as this community who are the people of God. But a particular community, not just any community, a community that's entrusted with a mission. The quote about being a chosen race and a royal priesthood comes from the first letter of St. Peter, and this is what happens next in that same quote. This is why God created a chosen race and a royal priesthood, to proclaim the mighty acts of God who has called you out of darkness into his wonderful light. That's the mission, to proclaim the mighty acts of God, not just with our words, obviously, but more importantly, with our witness, with our lives, with our action, with our outreach. And then lastly, in which all are called to play their part, and that was part of the focus of the prayer this morning. Variety of gifts, but always the same Spirit. Variety of services, but always the same Lord. A variety of activities, always the same God, who activates all of this in everyone. You might think, well, I don't have anything much to contribute to the church, or many of the people in our parishes might think that, or perhaps have never been actually encouraged to think about it. But this is from the beginnings of our faith. This is fundamental to the beginnings of our faith over 2,000 years ago. This is what they knew then and what we have to rediscover now. Last slide. So, for me at least, this is the question that I hope we together can really discern first and then decide about. Guided by the church, because we are members of the church. We are doing this as members of the Catholic community of the Archdiocese of Perth. So guided by the church, which is an invitation, by the way, to all of us, no one excluded, including me, all of us to be prepared to say, do I have to actually let go of some things that I have thought in order to be guided by the church? If I understand the church not just as a human reality, let's face it, all sorts of horrible histories and all sorts of failures and all the rest of it, not just a human institution, but an institution which is enlivened and constantly healed and renewed by the Spirit. So guided by this church, canon law, plenary council, synod on synodality, they're all elements of the church's gift of guidance. What kinds of structures, processes and procedures can we, this group, envisage for an effective Diocesan Pastoral Council which can meet the needs of our time and place as the Church of Christ in our Archdiocese? I began by reminding you that what we're doing today is part of a journey that started a long time ago. I also want to say that in many ways this is a pivotal moment in that journey and a moment for a bold step forward in that journey. And that's what I think we're all hoping will happen. So the journey continues. And I'll just conclude by saying that as soon as the prayer started this morning, I began to get a little bit emotional, I have to say, but also very excited because I'm leaving tonight to travel to Rome for the Synod on the Synod of Bishops, and I will be able to take this experience of today with me and share it with the people at the Synod, with the Holy Father, to assure them that at least here, and we're not alone of course, but at least here we are fully behind this renewal program which is unfolding in the life of the Church and of which we in the Church in Australia are playing such an important part. So, as that, if you can read it, that little image on the screen there, if you can see better than me, if we let him, he will show us the way. We can't presume that we've yet got the way, that my ideas are the only ideas and the only way this will work is if everybody's smart enough to realise that I know everything and they should do what I think. If we let him, he will show us the way. So the question is, are we prepared to let him? Thanks very much.